My name is Kevin Hines, and in the year 2000, I nearly died by jumping off the Golden Gate Bridge. I was depressed, I was terribly suicidal, and I thought I was a burden to my family. This was the furthest thing from the truth. I am beautiful, and so are you. Life is the greatest gift we've ever been given or will ever be given. So live it with me, and be here tomorrow and every single day after that. Welcome to the Mental Health Marvels Podcast.
All right. Hi, Jeff. How are you?
Kevin, good morning. It's great to see you and be with you, even though we're about 2,000 miles apart.
We're 2,000 miles apart, but we're right here together, and we've got you up on the big screen. There you are. There's the great Jeff Evans. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Mental Health Marvels Podcast. Once again, another episode for you. We can all be mental health marvels, stewards of change for people in mental pain, helping them find a better way to find hope, healing, the art of wellness and recovery, and have them find a will to find the way to stay here despite the pain, to do what they can to be well every day and have well-being to the best of their ability. Jeff, this is a special episode of Mental Health Marvels Podcast. This is kind of next level. We're going to talk in great detail about your good friend and mine, the great, the one, the true, the only, Mr. Larry King, the king of media.
Well, when you said to me that you wanted to, do this and have a conversation about Larry, certainly I was very excited because, as you know, I've become very good friends with him, I would say, over the last 3 years at least. And to this day, I pinch myself to think that I have become a friend of this legend of broadcasting.
And what a legend he is. Can you tell me, can you break down, maybe even consider in chronological order so people can see the growth and the legacy that is Mr. King?
Well, this legend has been doing what he's been doing now he just celebrated his 62nd year as a broadcaster, which is astounding. But, having become close to him, certainly over the last 3 years, I've had many conversations with him, and certainly he's been very open to share, his life, with me and as well as other close friends. And, this is a guy that on November 19th will be 86 years young. And, he's someone that truly will never retire. I see him probably, and we've talked about this, taking his last breath behind the microphone because that's what he wants to be doing. But he started his life in 1933, growing up in Brooklyn, New York. I would say probably the most defining moment of his life, he will say, is when at the age of 8 years old, his dad suddenly passed away from a heart attack at the age of 46. And I think that, that moment in time will remain in his memory forever. He knows exactly what he was doing. He describes himself as this little schoolboy carrying a lot of books home to find his mom crying. And then, of course, to learn that his dad had passed away. And his mom now was responsible for Larry and his younger brother. And that's something that, again, I think kind of trajected him into the world and life that he finds himself in today. It's interesting. He also went to Lafayette High School in New York. And for our listeners who might be familiar with Lafayette, it's a high school in Brooklyn that was the starting point for some very, very successful people. But Larry, being the sports fan that he is, it is the high school of Sandy Koufax, the Hall of Fame legend. And Larry, knew Sandy growing up very, very well. And, but Larry has been a baseball fan, from the early days of the Brooklyn Dodgers. And then, of course, when they moved out to LA, and Larry, moved here to LA. He's continued following that team very, very seriously. So, but, again, he grew up from the time he was 5 years old, dreaming of a career in broadcasting. He used to listen to the radio, he will say, and literally the voices that really painted these amazing pictures to the listeners. Because again, Kevin, we don't know, we never experienced that, but before television, radio was where people found their escape. And, families would crowd around the radio and listen to the most amazing programming that, today we have the fortune and the ability to turn on our TVs and, or stream on our laptops, great programming and movies. But back then in his early youth, it was the radio that, really afforded him the ability to really develop this dream of one day wanting to be a broadcaster.
You think of things like I used to listen to the audio tapes of Zorro and all those kinds of things. And when you listen to something like that before TV became so popular and before streaming was so much so taking over the media, listening to those tapes in old school format on my headphones with my tape deck that nobody even has anymore, even in this day and age, was fascinating. It would take you into a whole new world.
Absolutely. And he would talk about, I'm sure you've heard of the great line in radio, the shadow knows. It was a great program. Yeah. And that was something, again, that was very impressionable on this young man at the time. And literally from the time he was 5 years old, he truly dreamed of being a broadcaster because he was so taken back by the abilities of these radio personalities to bring things to life. And he knew that, at a very early age, that was a true art form. And again, that's where his whole future was he looked at his future as something in broadcasting.
He knew what he wanted to do from really the get-go, and the fact that he fully actualized his goals shows that he's one of he's one of what we call the 98th percentile. We've talked about this on the podcast before with other friends of mine. The 98th percentile, there's only 2% of the population of the world that fully actualizes their life's goals and dreams, and he is absolutely one of them. It's fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, to this day, 62 years later, he says to me and whoever, he has never, in his mind, has never worked a day in his life. Oh. And there's that saying, if you do what you love to do and are passionate about doing, you will never work a day in your life. And this is a man who literally believes he has never worked a day in his life because he's been doing what he's always wanted to do.
Oh, I love that, Jeff. That's fantastic.
I was going to say, it's interesting, too, to think about him. And so, from that very early stage of his life, having lost his dad, and then, of course, wanting to pursue a career in broadcasting, life was not easy for him and his brother and his mom. In fact, they went on, in those early days, there wasn't welfare. It was called something else, and it was actually, I think he refers to it as city assistance. In fact, he talks about getting his first pair of sunglasses thanks to the city. They lived pretty, it was rough. It was really rough. I think they had a 1-bedroom apartment in Brooklyn. And again, his mom struggled to, really put food on the table for him and his brother. So it was not easy, but, he always had a group of friends who, he hung out with. And to this day, his closest friend is a guy by the name of Herbie Cohen, who they're still as close, if not closer, than they've ever been. Herbie still lives in New York. So he definitely has had this, group of friends that, he's remained very close to. And unfortunately, and I think one day you and I will also experience this, as we, not older, but wiser, as we get up in years, we'll have certainly a circle of friends, very close people to us in our lives that, will be starting to pass away, and I think Larry, certainly has experienced this over the last 5 years, especially, where his so-called Brooklyn cronies that he would hang out with a lot of the time here in LA, have been passing away. So he kind of has brought in a younger generation, which I would like to include myself a part of, to hang out with him at what we call Breakfast with a King, which has been held on a daily basis for many years.
That's beautiful. You guys go to a particular spot in Los Angeles, California. We won't name drop the spot because everyone would show up to bother you. But, it's a beautiful thing when you can coalesce with some of your greatest friends, talk about all the world's issues and problems. And especially it's such a great thing to do that with Mr. King and his words of wisdom. That, on that note, Jeff, there's something I got to bring up that is directly related to this podcast. Where you're going to see a piece about it in one of the episodes, but I'll say it now. I'm going to pick this camera up and show you. In setting up the podcast, we've got a bunch of Marvel accoutrement here and a bunch of comic stuff. It is Mental Health Marvels, and there you see, the marvelous things right there. But look behind that. That is a ladder right there, and that ladder is very, very significant for me and for us in this podcast. That ladder means something. It means something to me because when we did this video with Mr. King that we brought at your Breakfast Club, he said something at the end of the video, which we will be eventually releasing, which we can't talk about right now. But he said to a young media mogul, if you will, who is coming up and trying to make his way in the world, who's having some issues with relatability. He said, "Forget what you've done in the past, just climb, baby, climb." And that it was a simple saying, simple few words, but it meant a lot to me because even though he was talking to my friend, he hit me right here. Right, I'll put this right there. He hit me right there.
Absolutely.
And I wanted to make that a part of every episode of this podcast. We're going to be having some of the most phenomenal minds here in Atlanta and there with you in Los Angeles, telling these stories. And I'm so grateful, Jeff, that you being so connected to Larry, our co-host of Mental Health Marvels, our man on the ground in Los Angeles, finding the stories that matter. It's going to be fantastic. I'm excited to see what comes.
Well, and Kevin, I've said this to you, off camera, whatever. I mean, it's an absolute honor, number one, to be your friend, and number two, to embark on this journey because, my early passions in life, to be honest, and there's that saying how our life goes in a full circle. Early in my lifetime, I too wanted to get into broadcasting, and different things happened in my life that took me on a different career path. But having this opportunity to be a part of what I believe is going to be the most incredible podcast on the air is truly an honor for me. It really is.
Oh, brother, that's fantastic. Well, the feeling's mutual. I think that, we're going to create some wonderful media together that changes minds and lives and hearts and souls. And but back to your friend Larry. I want to talk more about. I want to break down. You spent quite a bit of time at CNN. Quite a bit of time, and I'm not sure how that ended there. But I'd like to hear your perspective on that, and maybe some insight that you might have gotten from Larry about his career and his time at CNN.
Sure. I mean, first of all, I'd like to go back 1 second to that ladder. I think, again, It's so apropos. I think, the fact that, I remember clearly him talking about keep climbing. I mean, that certainly is something that this man has done his whole life because, I think most of us truly identify with Larry through his time at CNN, which was 25 years. But if we know a little bit about his early days and his early life, such as we talked briefly about, the most impressionable thing that happened in his early life was his dad passing away. Definitely life for Larry has been always climbing. In life, we will always experience challenges. Yeah. Some of us have more challenges than others, but certainly he's had a life full of challenges. I should, before we get into CNN, we should talk about really how he finally eventually launched his career. He I guess it was back in his early 20s, he ran into a gentleman on the streets of New York that suggested to him that he move to Miami, Florida. Now, this was around 1957, and Larry would have been then 24 years old. And up until that point, he had a lot of different jobs. I mean, he worked in finance, in the textile industry. He did a lot of different things, but he still had the dream of being a broadcaster. And anyway, he ran into this gentleman who worked for CBS. And the guy said, you know what? The business is starting to really open up, broadcasting open up in Miami. That's where you should go. So with very, very little money, Larry took the plunge and moved to Miami. And, you know, he started knocking on doors. And it didn't happen right away, but he eventually was hired by a radio station, basically to do whatever. And his break came when one night the on-air personality got sick. And the general manager turned to Larry, who basically was sweeping floors, running, you know, for coffee, whatever it was. He turned to Larry and said, "You're on." And Larry goes, "What do you mean?" He said, "We need you to cover so-and-so's, you know, spot on the air." So literally, Larry was born Larry Zeiger, Zeiger. And the general manager, prior to Larry getting on air, said, "Listen, you can't go by the name Zeiger." And Larry goes, "What do you mean? That's my name." He goes, "It's just too ethnic. It's just whatever." You know, so then Larry goes, "Well, what name do you want me to take?" And on the general manager's desk, as they're having this discussion, just prior to Larry getting on the air, was a newspaper, the local Miami Herald, I believe, that was opened. And staring in both of their faces was an ad for a local liquor store called King's Liquor. And that, my friends, is how Larry Zeiger became known as Larry King. The general manager goes to Larry, "Take the name King." And literally, he basically was like a little child being thrown out into the ocean for the first time to swim. Larry was basically thrown into the studio to become a disc jockey. And that is how Larry's career started. So that was 1957. And from there, he just really started to develop a following. And he eventually did overnight broadcasting from like 12 midnight to 5:30 in the morning on Mutual Broadcasting. He did local TV. But what's really interesting, and Larry will absolutely always say this, that his mentor, and we all at times need and want a mentor, his mentor was the great late Jackie Gleason.
Jackie Gleason.
From the Honeymooners fame.
Wow.
You know, and at that time, Jackie was considered one of the top comedian entertainers, and he started a variety show that literally was being broadcast from Miami. And Larry met Jackie Gleason on a train ride from New York to Miami. That's how they encountered each other. And from there, Jackie took a liking to this 24-year-old guy, and they developed a friendship. And literally, that friendship developed into a very, very close relationship over the years, to the point when Larry started doing some local Miami television. Jackie became one of his first interviews, and Jackie Gleason literally came into the studio and redid everything.
Oh, wow.
The way they had the couch, and I mean, it was simple in those days, but still, Jackie literally told Larry, "No, we need to do it this way," and rearranged the furniture to make it look as great as he felt it could look. And anyway, they developed that close relationship. And also Larry would state, one day Jackie, I guess they were having a conversation, and Jackie looked at Larry and said, "What's the one thing that you feel will never happen? And this was the early 60s. And Larry looked at Jackie and said, well, the one thing I think that will never happen for me is ever being able to interview Frank Sinatra. And Jackie goes, what do you mean? And Larry goes, listen, we all know that Frank doesn't give interviews. He shies away from the press. He's one of the hottest stars, but doesn't need the publicity. In essence, Larry was basically telling Jackie that's the one person he would love to interview. And it so happened at this time during this conversation, Sinatra was performing at the Fontainebleau Hotel in Miami.
Oh, wow.
So Gleason looks at Larry and goes, what are the what nights are they not on? What nights does he not perform? And Larry looked at Jackie, and said, I think Monday they're off. He goes, okay, kid, next Monday, we're going to get Frank Sinatra here for you to interview. And Larry goes, come on, will you stop kidding me? He goes, no, kid, I'm telling you, I'm going to get you Sinatra here next Monday. So, of course, Larry tells the general manager excitedly that I'm going to interview Frank Sinatra. The general manager goes, are you serious? And Larry goes, no, for sure. 9 p.m. next Monday here for me to interview. So again, this is like the early 60s. The general manager takes out a full-page ad in the Miami Herald to advertise Frank Sinatra being on Larry King's show. So anyway, so a week goes out, Monday comes, it's 8:59 p.m. It's only Larry and the general manager at the studio. And Larry's starting to get, yeah, exactly. So Larry's starting to get very nervous. The clock hits 9 p.m. and all of a sudden the door opens and this whole entourage comes in, and there's Frank Sinatra with his group. And in fact, the PR person for Frank immediately comes over, pulls Larry aside and looks at Larry and said, I'm just going to tell you one thing. During this interview, don't bring up the kidnapping of Frank's son. Frank Jr. had been kidnapped. And it was a really, really big story in those days. And Sinatra would, again, never gave interviews, but certainly never wanted to talk about this situation. So Sinatra sits down, and for the next 3 hours, sits with 3 hours. That's how comfortable Larry made Sinatra feel, to the point where midway during the interview, Sinatra brought up the kidnapping of his son.
Oh my God.
It was, yeah. And Larry really looks back at that moment, this interview, as truly putting the Larry King brand on the map of broadcasting.
Oh my God, Jeff, I got goosebumps all over my entire body. Let me ask you, for the kids that might be watching this show right now, for the millennials who have no idea who Frank Sinatra is, and some of these youngsters don't know who Larry is, sadly.
Sure.
Who would you compare them to? Could you compare the two of them to anybody in their respective fields today? If you had
honestly, I can't. I mean, Larry, basically, what somebody can do truly is with, certainly a click of the button on the phone, Google Larry King.
Yeah, he's still broadcasting. He's still out there. He's still getting it done every day.
Oh my God. In fact, Larry is so proud of something today that he's actually being taught in broadcast journalism classes around the world. That, I think, says it all.
They're saying to learn how to be a broadcaster, you follow the model of Mr. King. And, that's a great point you made there, Jeff, because I'm modeling this entire podcast off of what he told me when I sat with him the second time, which was I go off facts. And he has those blue cards with facts on them. And I'm not comparing myself to Mr. King. I'm nowhere near him. We just began this. But I'm saying I hope to aspire to be a good enough interviewer and host like Mr. King. And when we've done a few episodes here on set that have been just phenomenal, just based on getting 10 facts from people in chronological order about their life story. and it has been, when you're able to commit those to memory, you can create something pretty magical by engaging in a conversation and letting the person you're talking to lead the way.
Absolutely. And I think that's really what his whole career in broadcasting and interviewing has been about. It's to go into an interview not overly prepared, but certainly having some key thoughts and ideas about the guest, and letting the audience almost be sitting in Larry's chair, because I think the biggest word that describes Larry King and his success for 62 years has been he is one of the, if not the most curious human beings living. He's all about curiosity. And I think we talk about this too, that's one of the things we believe is lacking today because of the world we live in, which is, we're all about social media. We're all about clicking on the like button. Facts are at our fingertips, again, with the click of a button. So it really has taken the magic of true curiosity away. And I think it's something that a lot of the younger generation can become curious again, but it's up to them to want to be curious.
To want to be curious and to want to be educated in that curiosity, and not just something like, I'll give you an example. My little brother, he was about 9-10 years old, read every single book of the Encyclopedia Britannica cover to cover. Now that's next level genius, for my opinion, for a 9-year-old kid to do. But you don't see a 9-year-old doing that today.
No,
you don't see it. And that was purely based off of curiosity. And that 9-year-old, when he was allowed to, and myself, when we were allowed to, would sit up watching Larry King with our parents when they watched it, or even David Letterman when we would watch that. We went the special treat to stay up to watch David Letterman, and we missed those guys because I mean, and they're still on TV, but in the sense that they were so praised and loved and cared for and nourished. I don't see the younger generation looking for that today, but I do see a lot of the young generation, to be fair to them, creating something new that's different and kind of magical in its own right. This whole YouTube craze and this YouTube celebrity can be done for good, and it can be done for bad, or it can be done for just plain old silliness. But there are some folks out there that are doing great stuff with their channels to help other people, and I really like to enjoy those ones. But on that note, Jeff, please continue along in this journey with Mr. King.
Yeah. So, and what's funny, going back to that interview that was monumental in Larry's career, and as I said, with interviewing Sinatra for 3 hours, the man didn't want to leave. And to the day that Sinatra, and again for the young viewers who want to look up Sinatra, he was also known as Old Blue Eyes. So if you ever Google Old Blue Eyes, or his other moniker, he was known as Chairman of the Board. He, to this day, I think thought of as one of the, if not the greatest singers of his generation. But anyway, the story behind that interview and how Gleason was able to get that interview to happen was 3 years prior. Frank called Jackie Gleason up on the phone when he was supposed to perform, when Sinatra was supposed to perform, and got sick with laryngitis. And I forget, I think it was somewhere in New York. And Sinatra called up Gleason desperately asking, can you fill in for me? And again, Gleason was an entertainer, comedian, did some dance, whatever. And he said, sure, Frank, but you owe me a big one. And Frank said, Jackie, I do. 3 years later, when all of this came up that he wanted to get Sinatra on Larry King's program, he called Sinatra up and said, Frank, you remember 3 years ago you said you owe me a big one? Well, it's time to pay up. And that's how that whole interview came about. Is that a great story? Anyway, so from there, let's look at over the next few years, Larry really became pretty well known in South Florida. And then, of course, he had the national overnight broadcast show that, by the way, was the first of its kind. No one was doing an overnight show that was syndicated around the country back in those days. So everyone started to know who Larry King was. And one of the most important people that got wind of this overnight radio host was none other than Ted Turner. And Ted had recently started his, CNN, and hooked up with Larry, and made Larry a deal he couldn't refuse to continue doing his overnight radio show, but also to start hosting what is now known as Larry King Live. And it started in 1985 and ran to 2010. And needless to say, I mean, this is a man, honestly, if you think about it, 62 years behind the microphone. He has now interviewed over 60,000 people. Think about that, over 60,000 people. And when you think about the people that this man has interviewed, this is also interesting. I think one of the first times I sat with him at breakfast, being the curious person that I am, one of the first things I asked him was, with all the people you've interviewed, all the world leaders, presidents, etc., celebrities, whatever, who's the one person that you wound up never interviewing that you really wanted to interview? And without even having to think, he said, Fidel Castro. Fidel Castro, who led Cuba for many, many years. And of course, there was the whole Bay of Pigs situation with our President John F. Kennedy back in 1960 was the first true challenge that Kennedy had to face, was the possibility of nuclear war with Russia and Cuba, and Fidel was right at the center of all of that. That's the one person to this day Larry never got to interview. But by the way, he was in Havana. Larry was in Havana with a crew ready to have that interview when the rug was pulled out at the last second, and it never happened.
Regrets, right?
Yeah, but you think about who this man has interviewed, from just about every president that we can think of, going back to, in fact, he had a situation back in 1959 when Larry was, just new to Miami, where on a Sunday, Larry was driving around Palm Beach on Highway 1, which is right along the coast. And I think he was taking a friend to show them all of the beautiful homes along the coastline, when all of a sudden on a Sunday morning, early Sunday morning, Larry actually rear-ended a car in front of him by accident. He was not paying attention and stopped the car. The car that he rear-ended stopped also, and out of the driver's seat of that car in front of him that he had just rear-ended stood this young, handsome guy who was John F. Kennedy.
Oh my God.
And it was he, and all Kennedy said to Larry was, listen, pay attention when you're driving. And Larry said, I'm so sorry, sir, really. Is there anything I can do? And Kennedy said, no, don't worry about it. It doesn't look like there's a lot of damage, but I can ask you one favor. I'm running for president. Would you please vote for me? And that's all that John Kennedy asked of Larry was, please, can I count on your vote? And after he was elected, Kennedy was elected, Larry attended some type of dinner that Kennedy was at. I don't know if it was an honor for Kennedy, whatever it was. And Larry was sitting there, and Kennedy remembered Larry from that incident. Is that crazy? But anyway, this was Larry's life. I mean, just meeting and interviewing some of the most influential people in history. This is a great story too. There was a movie recently about, what was the name of the movie that was about Dick Cheney? It was a recent movie,
yes,
like a year ago.
Well,
anyway,
I don't know. We'll
I forget that. It'll probably come to us after we end this, but it was, up for some Academy Awards, whatever. But what's interesting is when Larry saw this movie, Not only did he interview every character in real life that was portrayed in this movie, but he also interviewed every actor that played the characters in the movie. I mean,
Really?
yeah, every character that was portrayed in this movie was during the young George Bush days with Dick Cheney as vice president. Every character every character in the movie was someone that in real life Larry had interviewed, and every actor that played these characters were someone that Larry had interviewed also. I
And
mean,
that was organic. That had happened in the past already up until this point.
oh yeah, yeah.
That's mind-boggling. We should play the game 6 Degrees of Larry King.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it's just absolutely phenomenal.
I feel honestly, Kevin, I feel very connected to just about every person that Larry's. I mean, again, at breakfast, I hear Larry tell stories about, oh, this person. I mean, people that I literally have dreamt about and read about and thought about, whatever. And here I am sitting with a man that literally has sat down and had intimate conversations with all of these people. It's crazy, absolutely crazy.
Just amazing. Do you have any more thoughts on Mr. King, his legacy, even his family life? Anything that you could leave us with about the man he is today, the man he's always been?
Well, I would say, with all of the great accomplishments he's had in his career with Lifetime Achievement Awards, such as a Lifetime Emmy, Peabody Awards, whatever, I think if you asked him today, what is his greatest achievement, he would honestly say the two sons that he has today with, his latest wife, which, by the way, he's been married 8 times to 7 different women. But his last marriage, which took place in 1997, he has 2 of the most amazing young boys. I mean, they're young men today. Chance being 20 years old, who just started attending USC, and Cannon, who's 19 years of age, who is attending West LA College and eventually will transfer probably to USC. Those are the 2 greatest accomplishments. He has a total of 5 children, and I believe 8 grandchildren, or 4 grandchildren and 9 crazy numbers. But yeah, he would say is his greatest accomplishment, because he has truly appreciated having these 2 boys at such a late time in his life, that he really has been a part of their development, and he's very proud of that.
Well, that's just a beautiful thing, and that's a great thing to, if we can, wrap up on. I think that sharing his story, his legacy, his life, his journey, and having you, the person to do it, couldn't be more appropriate and perfect for this podcast. Do you have any thoughts to take us out here, Jeff, today? I think instead of me wrapping up the Mental Health Marvels podcast, I want you to do it. I want you to take us away. Let them know that they can, they'll be able to watch. As we said that, a notification came down that said Marvel HQ, which is my daily Marvel, YouTube. Anyway, it doesn't matter. But
well,
yeah, Jeff, give yourself about 3 seconds. So there's a little lapse of no sound, and then take us away.
I would say that, it's been, again, an absolute privilege to share some of the stories about Larry and my friendship with him, which I'm very, very proud of and honored also. But like you said earlier, with the ladder behind you, no matter what challenges we face in life, from a mental health challenge to a physical health challenge to whatever it is, we're going to face challenges. The key is, how do we face those challenges? And I think Larry is an example of facing great challenges throughout his whole life and following his recommendation that he gave us a couple of months back, and that was keep climbing. Don't ever stop climbing. And that would be the last thing I would share.
Well, we'll leave it at that. Keep climbing, whatever you're going through in life, whatever you're dealing with, keep moving forward or upward and onward. You've got this on lockdown. We've got your back. And please click like, hit subscribe, hit that bell, and make sure to share this with a friend. We are the Mental Health Marvels, but so are you. Bye, guys. Take care. Be well.
Take care.
Be here tomorrow. Thanks, Jeff. See you, buddy.
Pleasure.